Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Ron Halber, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council. And the JCRC is the Public Affairs and Community Relations arm of the Jewish community, representing the Federation and over 100 Jewish organizations and synagogues and 300,000 Jews in the Greater Washington region. I'm grateful today for Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks for being with us here. Today's virtual town hall meeting with the county executive is a central part of our mission to educate the Jewish community ahead of this critically important election for the U.S. Senate. To be clear, as an independent 501c3, the JCRC does not endorse candidates for office. Many of the questions that I'll be asking the county executive today were recommended by viewers, so thank you for your insightful and timely suggestions. I'm going to introduce the county executive and then give her a few moments to just talk about why she's running for the Senate, and then we will start with questions. Angela Alsobrooks was the first woman to be elected Prince George's County State's Attorney in 2010. She was reelected, and after serving 2 terms as the county's top prosecutor, she became the first woman to hold become county executive and the first woman in Maryland's history to hold that position, and she was reelected as county executive in 2022. County Executive Alsobrooks, can you please take a few minutes to explain to our very nice sized audience about why you are running for the United States Senate?
Well, thank you. First of all, good afternoon to actually morning to you, Ron. And I want to thank you so much to JCRC for having me today. I want to thank everyone for signing on as well. I've been in public service now for 27 years, and I have enjoyed all 27 of those years. It's been so important to me to do the work of really investing in families, keeping families safe. I believe at the end of it, all of us want the same things for our families, and that's what I have really worked to make sure happen. The Senate gives a unique opportunity, I think, especially in the time that we're in, to decide the type of future that we want for our children and our grandchildren. Whether we want to have a country where our freedoms are preserved, a country where our children have the kinds of investments that will allow them to live the American dream, and whether we will build a kind of country that is consistent with our values. Those values are around democracy and freedom, human rights and integrity in our leaders and decency. And these are the issues that are on the ballot. And I believe that the stakes of this election are very high. And I am excited to have the opportunity to fight for our children, like my 19-year-old daughter, who is facing a country where she has fewer rights than her mother and grandmother, where too many of our kids now are facing a country where gun violence is the #1 killer of our children, where we are likewise looking at an economy that concerns so many about whether or not our kids will be able to even earn their way into not only the middle class, but to be homeowners and to be productive citizens, and where we have also seen a threat now at the presidential level of having a president in office who is an isolationist, who would likely abandon our allies, who has worked to try to destroy our relationships and to withdraw us from NATO. I believe we're going to have to stand with our allies. Israel is an ally. Ukraine is an ally. I think that America's standing across the world is very important. And I look forward to not only serving the people of Maryland, but also being a good partner to soon to be President Kamala Harris.
Thank you, County Executive. I really appreciate that. I'm going to try to get to as many questions. We have many on a diversity of topics. The first question may not surprise you. It's about anti-Semitism. As you know, the Jewish community constitutes approximately 2% of America's population. 2/3 of the hate crimes, religious-based hate crimes right now, are directed against Jews and their institutions. And I'd like to know, as a United States Senator, how would you try to impact that trend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very disturbing trend. I can tell you that I attribute a lot of the hate and division that we have seen to former President Trump, who normalized in too many instances hate, including anti-Semitism. I mean, none of us can forget what we saw in Charlottesville, where he called the people who were there with anti-Semitic tropes good people. And so this kind of division and hatred comes from poor leadership. We've also seen that we are in a disturbing time where parents like me are concerned about children on college campuses. I have a daughter who's a sophomore, and I can tell you, I feel like every parent that our children deserve to be safe and to feel safe on college campuses, that we should not tolerate on any level hate speech, threatening behavior, assaultive behavior. I think that, it's going to be really important that we stamp it out, anti-Semitism and hatred of all kinds everywhere that we find it. And that includes college campuses, too many of our communities. And what we know is that anti-Semitism, for example, was increasing prior to October 7th. We saw it here in Maryland. So I'll be working with my colleagues in the Senate to pass the kind of legislation that will continue to ensure that we have safe communities and where anti-Semitism is not only not tolerated, but I think we also have a lot of work to do to grow the kind of education and understanding that will help to bring people together. And I intend to be a leader in that regard. So there's a lot of work that will be done, and I'm going to be looking forward to doing it.
Thank you, County Executive. Many of the questions submitted had to do around Israel. So I tried to combine them into basically one question and three parts for you to sort of focus it. So the first question is, as a U.S. Senator, if you were to be elected, can you please describe, and I can repeat this if necessary, please describe your position on the U.S.-Israel relationship, the responsibility of the United States during the current war in the Middle East, and efforts to contain Iran. So the first question is the responsibility of the U.S.-Israel relationship in general.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'm a person, first of all, who's really fortunate to go to Israel. And in 2019, had an opportunity to go, as you know, well before the world shut down for COVID.
No.
And during that period, I've been able to describe to a number of people the experience I had where, my father used to tell me as a child that people know more than they understand. And my experience there helped me to see firsthand many of the security concerns that existed, and to have an opportunity to visit the Knesset and to go to Golan Heights, to be in a kibbutz, and to have so much conversation that really helped me to understand the need for the defensive aid, the aid that the United States gives to Israel. We talked a lot about the Iron Dome and talked about a number of other really important ways that the United States and Israel not only share common values, but also share common interest. And that relationship between the United States and Israel is a long-standing one. I might also add that the relationship has been supported on a bipartisan basis for many, many decades now. I think it's important that it remains so, that this not become an issue that is a political issue. I think the relationship between the United States and Israel is solid. It's an over 80-year relationship. It's also the case that as a person who was raised right on the edge of the civil rights movement, I was raised to understand that the Jewish community and the African American community are allies, that none of us can forget the support that we received during the civil rights movement and beyond. So that is my orientation to this issue. I can tell you that in this moment, I share the concern and belief that the priority in this moment is to get the hostages back to their families. I've watched, like everyone, the extreme pain and suffering that has occurred. And I think getting the hostages home, hoping to move toward a ceasefire after the hostages are back, and making sure that we are continuing in this moment to get the important humanitarian aid that is necessary for those who are suffering in Gaza is going to be really important, as well as I'm hoping that we can continue to work toward a two-state solution, which will allow peace and stability and security for Israel, as well as allow peace, security, and self-determination for the Palestinians in Gaza. I know that part of what the concern has been, as we've been reading in recent days, is the threat of a growing conflict in the Middle East. And I've been able to have really amazing conversations, for example, with Senator Cardin. And part of what we've discussed is the need on a long-term basis to make sure that we are building those multilateral relationships with UAE and Jordan and Saudi Arabia that will allow us to isolate Iran and to thereby create the kind of peace and stability that's going to be needed on a long-term basis in the Middle East. And so I think those relationships are going to be critically important. And I am, of course, very hopeful that we will be able to build on those relationships and to achieve that kind of stability and peace.
Let me just ask you one follow-up question on that. Well, first about I think you were talking a little bit. If you go on a little bit more about Iran, I think where you would try to say that it's the multilateral relationships that will be need to contain Iran. Is that what?
Yes, to isolate Iran. Right, exactly.
Okay.
The multilateral relationships will make us stronger and allow us to isolate Iran, is what I was saying.
Okay. One question that comes up about this, and then I'll move on to the next question. Your position on military aid to Israel in general.
Right. I support aid to Israel, and I've been consistent with that. Yeah, I do support aid to Israel.
Thank you. So what do you think are the top 3 issues facing Marylanders today?
I would say, that as I traveled across the state, economic opportunity, I think, is the number one issue across our state. People are very concerned about the cost of living, about the cost of groceries, the cost of medication, the cost of housing, have been issues that I've heard resonate, as well as issues around transportation. These are some of the common denominators I've heard no matter where I've gone across the state. And I think it's going to be important to continue to focus on growing jobs and income, similar to what I've done as county executive. It's been the reason it's been really important for me to have worked with Congressman Hoyer and work with our delegation to bring the National FBI headquarters back to Maryland, to bring back a critical, not only jobs, but the opportunity to have cybersecurity companies and technology companies come into our state. Choice is another issue that has been really a dominant issue across the state. And this issue is one, as I've mentioned, that's personal. I have a 19-year-old daughter, and like so many with daughters and granddaughters, I want my daughter to have the privacy and the freedom to make her own healthcare decisions. I want that decision belongs to her and only her. And what we know is with this Republican Senate that we've seen, it's not just abortion care. We're talking about contraception and IVF, which are also at risk. And this is an issue that's concerned not just to mothers, but I've heard fathers and grandfathers and others who are also concerned about the lives of their daughters and want them to have the freedom to make their own choices. And also violence. Gun violence is another issue that has really resonated. The concern around the unfortunate distinction that America has now, that the number one way that our children die is at the hands of a gun. And there are many who are very concerned about gun violence. So I would say economic opportunity. I would say that including keeping down the cost of healthcare. Healthcare costs are a huge issue across the state, and accessibility to healthcare too. In some of the rural parts of the state, it's the case that they don't have specialists and others there. But on every one of these issues, it is very important to note the difference between the way that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party sees these issues. It's the reason that holding the majority in the Senate is critically important. It is critically important. The anti-choice party that has declared war against the rights of women, the one that is essentially handing over to the NRA the opportunity to write gun laws for our country, and who have been just really impenetrable when it comes to passing an assault weapons ban, a ban on ghost guns. And we know where economic opportunity is concerned. It has been the Democratic Party that has made the investments in our economy, including the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act that's building an economy, including a green economy, and capping the out-of-pocket cost of prescription drugs. But remember, where that Inflation Reduction Act is concerned, for example, every single Republican voted against it. When we think about the Affordable Care Act that has allowed people like me to keep my 19-year-old on my insurance until she's 26, the Republicans, when they were in control of the Senate, tried on 67 different occasions to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And so they absolutely cannot be in control of the Senate lest they take us backwards.
Thank you. Actually, you hit on many of the questions that I was going to ask you. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can. You've anticipated many of my questions, County Executive. So let me try to see if I can get specific on some and skip others. Okay, since this January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, there's been fear across the nation that our democracy is under assault. If you're elected as the next U.S. Senator from Maryland, how would you work to ensure our democracy is preserved?
Yeah, our democracy is under assault. And again, when we think about why it's important to have the majority in the Senate, democracy stems also from the right to vote. And so the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the For the People Act that has been passed and worked on for years by Congressman Sarbanes is one that I would support. and really just continue to support not only democracy here, but we recognize that we have to support democracy across the world. Again, Israel is a democracy. Ukraine is a democracy. And so this is an issue that I'll continue to insist that we lead on here and across the world, is preserving our democracy. And we know that shamefully, not only is the case that our former president, I think, is a treasonous individual, but it was Mitch McConnell, the same person who attracted Larry Hogan to this race and recruited him, was a person who lacked the courage to hold former President Trump accountable for January 6th. He refused to. And what he said in this moment is yet again, is very concerning. What did he say just this past week? He said, for whatever I have said pales in comparison to what J.D. Vance said about Donald Trump. You know, they all have these negative views of him, but he said, in this moment, we're all on the same team. And I think that is still true for Mitch McConnell. And it is unfortunately extends to Larry Hogan, who could have run as an independent if he was an independent, wanted to, but he decided to line up with these Republicans who, if they are in control, refuse to stand up for our country regarding January 6th.
So considering where we are now with the repeal of Roe v. Wade, what role can you play as a U.S. Senator in trying to ensure that women have access to reproductive freedom?
So the Women's Health Protection Act is one that I will co-sponsor. I think it's going to be especially important to codify in federal law a woman's right to choose. And I want that right to exist, not just in Maryland. I want that right to exist across the country. I don't think your geography should determine whether or not you have rights. I think it's significant that my opponent has said he would not support the Women's Health Protection Act. I think it is also significant to note that that at the beginning of this year, in the primary, my opponent, when questioned directly about whether or not he would support in federal law, whether he would vote to codify in federal law women's right to choose, said, quote, "I refuse to speculate on any piece of legislation." It wasn't until the primary passed that he said he, essentially now become pro-choice. But what we know is, again, when we think about the majority, if the Republicans control the Senate, there will be no vote on Roe. We already know, we've seen this all before, because we have not forgotten what Mitch McConnell did to President Obama. He did a couple of things. One is he said, and this is still disturbing to me, many of us remember when he said that his chief priority was to make sure that Barack Obama failed. But he also deprived him of the vote for Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, and thereby set us on this course where we have the Supreme Court that we have. So I will be not only voting for the Women's Health Protection Act, but I'm going to be voting also for pro-choice judges, and voting against judges who have, similar to the ones who are on the court now, who are determined to take us backwards. Larry Hogan is not that. We know that he's just in the debate last week or whenever it was, I'm losing track of when things are happening, it's going so quickly, when questioned directly about whether he would have voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, what did he say? I don't know, I wasn't there. And he also, in the same summer that Roe was overturned, said, quote, "Donald Trump deserves credit for his accomplishments in office, including the, quote, incredible Supreme Court justices he nominated." I will not be voting to confirm Supreme Court justices who don't support our freedoms, including a woman's right to choose, but also the appellate level judges. The senator is going to have to also be there to confirm these other judges, and I'll be looking to support judges that support a woman's right to choose.
County Executive, what attributes and qualities are you looking for in a Supreme Court justice?
Well, one who respects precedent is going to be really important, and that's what we've seen eroded in this case, is that the disturbing trend away from precedent that has resulted in the erosion of our rights. That's what we've seen in these in last several decisions that have also been ones that tend to appear political. So we need judges that respect the law, the ones that also respect legal precedent, and certainly would be judges that make decisions that increase rights and don't take them away.
How do we ensure that regardless of one's zip code, that our children have access to the best quality education?
Yeah, this is an issue that has certainly disturbed me. You know, I grew up in a working class family. I'm the daughter of a receptionist and a car salesman. Neither of my parents had the opportunity to go to college, but education, I can tell you, was centered in my family. It was very, very important. But we weren't wealthy people. And I've noticed over the years, especially as an executive, that because we rely so heavily on local property taxes, that the quality of your education is tied directly to your zip code. This inequality, I think, is something that we must fix because the inequality for our children starts so early, so early. And your education determines in large measure, a lot of the trajectory of your life. I think making sure we grow funding for Title I schools is going to be really important to ensure that all of our children have access to quality education. I think it's going to be important to invest in the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act also, to ensure that our students who have disabilities likewise have the opportunity to experience their greatest potential. And I think we're going to have to keep down the cost of college. It has become cost prohibitive for too many of our kids. And so that's not the zip code question, but I think just in general, the cost of education has really become cost prohibitive. So increasing funding for Pell Grants, making sure that our kids are able to afford it, and working to just bring down the cost of college altogether.
Thank you. Right now, whether one rents an apartment or tries to buy a house, housing is very expensive. Do you have any ideas about how America can address that issue?
I do. My parents were 22 and 23 when they married, and I marvel at the fact that they didn't earn very much money, but within 5 years of their marriage, they could afford a modest home. That is no longer the situation, and there are so many families who feel discouraged by it. I can tell you, our kids are very concerned. I talk to college students about this all the time. This is an issue I've worked on as county executive. Not only creating a housing investment trust fund, but we've used things like the right of first refusal. And I've been able to, since 2020, we've preserved or grown workforce housing, about 5,000 units of it. I love what Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed regarding housing. She said a couple of things. One is that she would support a $25,000 tax incentive for first-time home buyers. But she's also said that she believes that the way forward in terms of bringing down the cost of housing is to simply increase the stock of housing. I think that's true. When we look out, we see that there is a shortage of housing overall. And I think that has impacted the cost of housing. So I'd be looking forward again to working with soon to be President Kamala Harris to really attack this issue and find solutions to it, because we know that housing is fundamental to the success of families. And by the way, it is the place where we create generational wealth. In so many instances, it is how we pass along wealth is through home ownership. And so I want to really create more opportunities for more families to own homes.
Thank you, County Executive. Many experts have increasingly believed that the prohibitive cost of childcare is inhibiting economic growth. I hear about it all the time from people in my age group or younger who have young kids about the enormous amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars a year, where sometimes they actually have to make a choice between entering into the job market or staying home, because it creates that sort of disincentive because you're spending so much to take care of your children. So is there anything we can do nationally to lower the cost of childcare?
I think that you're right. First of all, the issue of childcare is one that is especially important to families, to younger families who are trying to afford it. I think we're going to have to look at a few things. I like the vice president has made a proposal that I'll be looking forward to working to kind of flesh out the details on, where we can cap the amount that a person pays for childcare to 7% of their income. I think that's a noble goal. Be looking again to work out how we further flesh that out. But I think we're also going to have to find a way to pay childcare providers, to incentivize offering that service. We've seen this since the pandemic, at least here in Prince George's, and I know the trend was very similar across the country. Is 40% of our childcare providers did not come back to provide childcare after the pandemic. So I think we're also going to have to find a way to incentivize childcare providers to provide that service. And so I'll be looking to find some solutions to it. But I know that this is an issue that really does impact the bottom line. I think, the permanent child tax credit is one way to help families be able to afford the cost of child care. And I think just in general, making sure that we are creating income and increasing income is going to go a long way toward helping families afford everyday expenses like childcare. That's the reason encouraging the cybersecurity and technology jobs that the FBI brings, and just creating opportunity in general. This gives me a place to say really quickly, Ron, it's part of why I was so disturbed at former Governor Hogan's decision to send $900 million back to the federal government that had been set aside for Baltimore. I've never heard of in the history of our state a governor who sent back federal funding to the federal government, $900 million of it for the Red Line that would have attracted economic opportunity to Baltimore and by extension to our state, and would have allowed people to simply access those opportunities. That's the best way for families to afford the cost of living, is to create jobs and to increase income. And I'll be looking to bring infrastructure and investment, not to send it back. I've brought $100 million in new investment to the New Carrollton Metro Station in just the last 2 years. And I've worked with our delegation to do that. I've worked with Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen and others to bring back investment. And I'm going to continue to work to do that.
When I asked you about the three most important issues that you're hearing around Maryland, you gave a very nice summation of them. One of them you also talked about was transportation. That sort of goes a little bit into what you said too about Governor Hogan. What do you think are the transportation issues that we're facing most, and what are your ideas about resolving them?
Yeah, transportation and infrastructure is a huge issue. We have not only aging infrastructure that needs investment, but we have to create also additional transportation options for Marylanders. I think the answer to that, again, is increased investment. That's the reason that the bipartisan infrastructure bill is so transformational. That was pushed, of course, by President Biden and Vice President Harris. But I also know as an executive that because the bipartisan infrastructure bill happens on a formulaic basis, meaning we get by formula, each state gets a certain portion of it, but there are also competitive grants that can be of assistance. I applied competitively for raised grants that we had never gotten before in the state. Some of that raised grant funding went to New Carrollton. Some of it went to transit near the Suitland Metro Station. So I'll be working with jurisdictions across the state to make sure we're applying for the competitive grants also. And we also were able to bring back some of those raised grants and some of the competitive federal grants to grow public transportation. We will be bringing online about 32 new electric buses. And so making sure that public transportation is a part of the plan is going to be really important. So here and across the state, when you go to Western Maryland, you'll find that some of those communities don't have Uber and Lyft. And so it's really going to be necessary to make the kinds of investment in the rural parts of our state as well as places like Montgomery County, Baltimore. You go to Frederick, the issues are very, very similar, that we really need additional transit options and investment in transit.
Like you, I have a 19-year-old daughter who's in her sophomore year of college. And she asked me once about, did I, when I went to public school in New York, grow up having to prepare for an intruder with a gun? And I told her, I said, no, that was not. The worst we had to do was a fire alarm. And we know, as you said, gun violence is the leading cause of death among children. And I've always thought about and wondered about how psychologically scarring that is, that they have to live in our public schools with the constant, in our schools and our society with the constant threat of guns, of violence. So my question is to you is, how do we combat the scourge of gun violence and just in general, the growing crime rate in America?
Yeah, the gun violence it's really unconscionable that we've allowed it to go the way it has. When I grew up, we practiced fire drills. And these children are literally practicing active shooter drills. And I can tell you also, as a person we're building schools here in Prince George's, about 18 of them will be building during the 6-year period. We've broken ground on. We've had to change the design for our schools to now incorporate the needed changes because of the mass shootings. This is really a sad trend.
You've actually had to change the architectural designs of the school.
Yes. to accommodate.
Wow.
Yes, to accommodate what we've seen with mass shootings.
Yeah.
So to add the new security features, which is a sad trend. Gun violence means we need sensible gun laws. Passing an assault weapons ban, a ghost gun ban, making sure that we are really, passing those laws. Now, I can tell you, you've heard a lot about crime, but what you haven't heard is that, well, maybe you've heard that when he was governor, Larry Hogan did not help us. He's been very critical of crime, which, by the way, when I was the elected state's attorney here, I oversaw a 50% cut in violent crime. During his time as governor, we saw a 66% increase in murder. We saw an 80% increase in rape. And we also saw him veto a really important legislation after Sandy Hook that would have allowed a sensible waiting period for long guns, and also refused to sign outright a ban on ghost guns. So really doubled down and made it worse. And again, it is part of why we have to make sure that the Republicans are not in control of the Senate, because we've already seen when they were in control that they do not take seriously the issue of gun violence and gun control. And we're going to have to really, we need some movement. Your daughter's question is a good one. Is she going to be safe? That's what they understand. And it's what all of us parents understand. It's horrifying. I dropped my child off at college. It used to be the case that when you dropped your kids at the school door, whatever that was, elementary, middle, high school, college, you thought they were safe. We're terrified now because there's almost no place where you are immune. Anytime the former president himself was a target of gun violence, we know that it can happen almost in any community. So we've got to do something about the guns.
Yeah, research shows that, thank you for that very extensive answer. Research shows that climate change is increasing the frequency, duration, and intensity of extreme weather incidents. We also happen to know it's the #1 issue among college-age students. This is what they are, and including in the Jewish community and polls among Jewish climate change. It's all about climate change. What do you think we need to address it? What do you think we need to do to address this?
I think climate action is critical. It's something I've done as county executive here. We've really invested heavily in climate action. For example, we have the only countywide composting program in the state. And I'm very proud of that. It took some time and some education for us to get it there. We also lead the state in solar energy. So I think we're going to have to make the right investments. The Inflation Reduction Act was a great piece of historic legislation. That will allow us not only to begin to incentivize participation across communities in electric vehicles and other things, but it also creates for us the opportunity to grow a green economy. And I think what we're going to have to do is to continue to close the education gap. I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges. I mentioned the countywide composting as an example of it. Is it took some education. It took going out to meetings, talking to people about the way that they could impact climate change. And once we did that, I'm seeing increased participation. But the communities that most need to be involved in climate change generally have the least amount of education and information about how to participate. So along with what we do to continue to grow things like the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to have to really make sure we're continuing the education that helps us to close that gap. But remember, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act was voted against by every single Republican in Congress. And we also know that if we allow the Republicans to be in control of the Senate, Ted Cruz is a person who's eligible to be over the Science Committee, and he's a climate denier. So these people do not believe in climate change, and will not only continue to impact things like the Environmental Protection Agency, but also they will be supporting judges who will pass. We saw what the Chevron decision will mean for regulation, and will affect the work that we're doing on climate. And you're right. Let me just say this. Our kids are watching. They know exactly what is happening. I think that's the reason we're going to see them go out in droves and vote for President Kamala Harris, because they recognize that their future is at stake. And we've seen these college students are going out in huge numbers to vote. This issue is one of them. My daughter's among the numbers. And they recognized, I think many of them are going to be voting for the Democratic Party because they know we've led on these issues.
How do we maintain America's tradition of welcoming immigrants to our shores and at the same time controlling our border?
I think there was an effort. I think you're right. First of all, let's just level set and say that legal immigration is in the best interest of our country, that we have seen the the contributions of our immigrant community, which has contributed not only to our economy in powerful ways, but also contributed to the culture of our community. I think we're also going to have to address the issue at the border. And we had a way forward to do that with the bipartisan immigration bill that Vice President Harris and President Biden had worked very hard to push forward. And we were very close. We had some of the most conservative Republicans who also supported this bipartisan immigration bill that would have increased funding for Border Patrol agents, helped us to also have the people necessary to do asylum claims and to control the fentanyl coming across the border. But it was Donald Trump who said that he preferred to have chaos to a solution at the border. And it was the Republicans who killed that bill. So we're going to need some people who are serious about working together in a bipartisan fashion to address the crisis at the border, while also making sure that we are acknowledging the contributions that our immigrant community have made to our country and to our communities. And I think there's a way for us to find pathways to citizenship, increase pathways to citizenship, while also doing the work of securing our border.
More than ever, Americans are seeking access to mental health. And we know that the reimbursement rates for therapy are nowhere strong, the level of reimbursement is not high enough for many people seeking therapeutic options. There's also a limited amount of people who are empaneled by insurance companies to provide therapy. So a lot of Americans are finding it increasingly inaccessible to get the mental health that they need, mental health services that they need. And I was just wondering if you have any ideas on how to address this growing need in America.
It is a growing need, and it's one that I have noticed, and this is true, I'm sure all across the state is true here in our county. The number one health needs assessment we have is behavioral health. It's the reason that I took the opportunity to build the first of its kind mental health and addictions care facility here in 2022. And we just recently in April opened the state's first crisis stabilization center, so that for our loved ones who are in a mental health crisis, that we are calling to our homes the correct people who know how to safely get our loved ones to get the care that they need. I think we're going to have to continue to make sure that we are looking to provide this care through things like the Affordable Care Act. And I think that we also are going to have to, again, continue making sure that we're funding Medicare. We're seeing a huge population, even among our seniors, who are suffering in this area. We see a number of veterans who are suffering as well. So making sure that we make available the funding to fund mental health care is going to be really important, and that we have the facilities that are going to be necessary. You mentioned something earlier, Ron, that I want to go back to when you talked about violence. There is a direct connection between what our children witness in terms of violence and their ability to perform in school. It is an injury that occurs to our children. You know, I began my career as a domestic violence prosecutor. And one of the things that I really worked on this with Brian Frosch, was to get legislation that allowed us to sentence up to an additional 5 years for individuals who committed acts of violence knowingly in the presence of children, because it has a lifelong impact on children who sit home and watch violence. It affects them throughout their lives, and the mental health, the harm that it does to their mental health carries on until their adulthood. So preventing violence from happening in the first place is going to be important, but certainly also having the supports necessary in school and in other places to treat and help people who are suffering from mental health crises is going to be very important to their productivity and to the overall health of our community.
So final question before I give you a chance to just offer a few concluding remarks. If we can just take it up a level on mental health care, healthcare, even with Obamacare, even with all the things, we still have healthcare. Healthcare prices are out of control. The cost of buying insurance is extraordinary for small businesses, for individuals who are self-employed, for people who are unemployed. How do we get people to get the coverage that they need?
I think you're right that the healthcare costs are exorbitant. I think the need for healthcare is tremendous as well. I can tell you it's something that we're going to have to address at the same time that we're addressing an escalating debt crisis. You know, we have about $35 trillion in debt in our country. And that's going to have to be addressed. I think there are a number of ways for us to address it. I think we're going to have to find a way to slow the growth of government spending. There's legislation where that's concerned. But I think we're also going to have to look at the tax structure that allows these huge corporations not to pay their fair share of taxes. Many of them pay fewer taxes than a lot of the people on this line. So I think we're going to have to make sure we have fair tax policies. But I can tell you a few things that I do support. Where Medicare is concerned, I really do love the Vice President's proposal to consider offering Medicare to pay for some portion of in-home care. This is absolutely transformational for most families like mine. You know, I'm in the sandwich generation, so I have two aging parents, a mother who needs in-home care and who has a number of issues now, health issues. But we know we're going to have to maintain Medicare. And we're also going to have to, as I mentioned, maintain the Affordable Care Act because the insurance rates were not fair before the Affordable Care Act. Many of the women will not forget that it was a pre-existing condition prior to the Affordable Care Act to be a woman. And it allowed insurance companies to discriminate based on these pre-existing conditions. And so we cannot go backwards where that is concerned. We're going to have to find a way to cover the cost of health care and at the same time, really keep down the debt that is growing by the day. We don't want to hand on to our children any burdens. And that's really, if I can frame a lot of what I've said today, is we owe it to our children. This election is literally about them, about their future, about this state, about our country, and the type of place that we will pass on to them, whether we will pass along the debts and burdens that we have talked about, the burden of climate change, whether we'll pass on to them the burden of not being able to afford health care, the burden of not being able to afford houses. We want to pass on to them opportunity, the opportunity to have jobs and income, to live in safe places, and to be able to worship and to live freely, free of discrimination, free of anti-Semitism, free of all of the division and chaos that has been created over time by Donald Trump. We have an affirmative decision that we can make in this moment to turn the page, to move on to something that is more consistent with who we are as a country. And again, those values, which are the values that the United States and Israel share with each other, are the values around democracy and freedom and human rights and integrity and decency. These are the values that we share, and we have joint interests as well, not only keeping Israel safe, but also maintaining stability and safety in the Middle East. This is what we will do together. And we will do that with leaders who see more ahead of us than behind us. And unfortunately, Larry Hogan, who's a person I like as a person, it has aligned himself with a party of people who do not share these values, who are isolationists, who are not pro-choice, who do not see any problem in terms of the gun laws in our country. And if he is a part of that party, his mere election would empower a caucus of people who, no matter what he says, he would not have the power to change them. We already have seen this happen before with Mitt Romney and a number of other people. Kamala Harris, in order to be successful, is going to have a good partner. I am going to be a good partner to Kamala Harris. I'm going to support her agenda and support Marylanders and the American people.
Well, I'm assuming that is a closing statement.
That is a closing statement, and I'd be a horrible candidate if I did not also ask for your support and the support of those who are on the line today. I'm looking forward to representing Marylanders. I know that you will not be disappointed in my representation. I look forward to continuing to build a relationship with JCRC and members of the community, and look forward to to addressing many of the challenges of the day.
So, County Executive Alsobrooks, thank you for your long friendship with Maryland's Jewish community and for taking the time to join us here today. And we also thank our audience for joining us. And we just want to ask everybody, I would not be a good moderator if I didn't tell everybody that you can vote by mail, that you can drop off your ballot at a county site, that you can early vote October 24th through 31st, or on Election Day, Tuesday, November 5th. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And please remember to vote. Have a good day.